that conversation. Honorable Irungu Kangata, before the break, we had a few callers call in, many of them directing their questions to you. Let's now hear your response.
Yes, you see, my colleague here had a lot of airtime to poison the public against the government, and I hope you are going to give me adequate time also to unpoison the public. From where I sit, I think it is not true that the government has been trying to subvert the will of the people, and in particular, allow us first to contextualize the current impasse. The current impasse, from where I sit, commenced about, let's say, 2 years ago, from the date when Baba came from abroad and started agitating for some reforms. And when you look at the kind of demands that Baba was making, you can see our president was quite magnanimous to the extent he has been acceding to several of those demands. For instance, he demanded that we throw out the Isaac Hassan-led commission. Indeed, that happened at a very great cost in terms of financial payment to those people. Then thereafter, they pushed that we digitalize these elections. And that happened, and again, at a very huge cost on the part of the taxpayer. So once we had these elections, now he is continuing to make several demands. So I wanted to say that as a rejoinder to a question that was raised by one of the callers, and that caller appeared to allude as if that the government does not listen to the opposition, it does not take up the demands of the opposition. The point is, it's not true. When you look at the historicity of the entire impasse, we can be able to demonstrate we have been listening to the opposition whenever there is good points. But still, you must also look at what would be their hidden agenda. Their hidden agenda is very clearly is that they don't want to do a second round runoff. They don't want to undertake it. Otherwise, there's no way, for instance, they would be demanding things which cannot happen within the remaining time frame. Remember, we have only about, is it 30 days before we have a rerun? 30 days, you cannot, for instance, be able to bring major radical changes in the commission. For instance, if you are to push out one commission, which is one of the demands by NASA, that composition cannot be filled up in law. Why? Because the president, as we speak, as per the advice that was given by the AG, he does not have the power to appoint a new commissioner. Number two, they're also proposing to kick out the CEO. If you kick out the CEO, there will be operational bottlenecks that are going to arise. Who is going to sign the relevant contracts? Who is going to do relevant hiring? Who is going to do relevant procurement? And when you start now a new process of hiring a new person to become the CEO, that again is impossible within the set time frame. That has been there.
And I just want me to be taking a look at whether NASA is the only one making demands on IBC that might not be able to be implemented within the next 30 days, because several proposals by Jubilee have been proposed for this parliamentary group meeting being held this morning. We'll get to that. But Honorable Kajwang, let's now focus away from the individuals. Some of the other irreducible minimums that NASA has been speaking about. One of them was with regard to ICT. What is NASA's demand there?
I was part of the team that was involved in verification of the systems that were used by IBC in the last elections. And the Supreme Court was very correct to say that IBC refused to give us access to the systems because we suspect that in the systems there could have been some scripts, there could have been some PL/SQL scripts, that is what we call them in the technical jargon, that could have been used to alter the results of the elections. The law says that the system or method used should be transparent, verifiable, and accountable. Today, I hear Jubilee talking of changing the law so that you can have a complementary mechanism that is manual. They don't have to change the law for that. It is just 6 months ago that we are fighting in Parliament and on the streets of Nairobi over their proposal to introduce, I think it was a section, I don't know whether it was 4A, but there was an A that they included in that electoral law that where technology fails, IBC could resort to a complementary mechanism. Now, so on systems, we want to ensure that we are going into elections with systems that have not been compromised. Just like the illustration that I gave you, it is like shaking the debe and turning it out upside down and confirming that there is nothing, there is no vote that has already been put in there. There is no script or algorithm that is going to manipulate the results. It is that transparency and clarity that we are asking for.
Right. As it stands, when it comes to ICT, IBC says already it has contracted experts from the UN and Commonwealth to be embedded in the electoral ICT team. Does that, for NASA, raise any confidence, any transparency and goodwill on the part of the Commission?
I don't think that is anything new. The electoral law sets up a technology advisory group. In fact, I don't know why IBC is keen on reinventing things outside the law. If IBC was to go by the law, that Technology Advisory Council, IBC sponsored someone to go to court to declare it unconstitutional, yet it is something that was passed. What we needed to do was to ensure that that Technology Advisory Council operates as envisaged by the law. Then we would not have to have these things of bringing experts from other places. You know, Justice Chunga would be asking experts for what, on what, about what. If you bring in experts without a clear framework, then those questions are bound to rise. What will be the scope of the engagement? Further, IBC says that they have already started an audit of their systems, more of an internal audit. But we don't know what the scope of that audit is. We had a similar situation where KPMG was paid millions of shillings of taxpayers' money to conduct an audit whose result was not served on Parliament as required by the law, and whose result was not useful in any way, because all they did was to say that there could be millions of dead voters in the register, and that was the end of it. So if you're going to engage experts, go back to the law, set up the Technology Advisory Council that will guide you. If you're going to conduct an audit, make sure that the scope of that audit is defined, it is clear, it is smart, and it is one that meets the acceptance of all the stakeholders.
While NASA is advocating for reforms within the technology bit of a transmission of results, Jubilee, on the other hand, in the parliamentary group meeting today, is proposing a change of the electoral law to make it clear that a complementary system, as envisaged within the electoral amendment laws 2016, is a manual system. And they argue that this was a big ambiguity that led to the nullification of the August 8th election. According to you, Honorable Kangata, what does a complementary system as envisaged in the electoral law entail?
When we amended the electoral law, we did not specify what we meant by that phrase. And what we may be seeking now to do is to clearly clarify what that system means. In fact, what we did, we left the IBC the power now to declare that through a certain Kenya Gazette. But now that it appears IBC was somehow not vindicated by the Supreme Court, we now need to do now the actual work of clarifying what did we mean. And but also we need also to note that the current laws which underpin our elections were entered through what we call a bipartisan approach. There was a committee that was comprised of people from NASA, from Jubilee Coalition. They sat down, they crystallized several laws, and then they were taken to Parliament and they were passed. And therefore, it was quite surprising on our part when we realized that NASA was not happy with those laws, notwithstanding their great participation in the making of those laws. I say so because they filed 46 cases seeking to challenge those laws on various aspects. They would, for instance, go to court saying, no, don't audit this the voters' roll, whereas it is a legal requirement for that auditing to happen. They would go to court challenging this. So that shows in totality that indeed NASA did not either plan to go to an election or it was not really negotiating bona fide. So in reply to your question, today when we go to the State House, some of the things that I've seen being captured in the newspapers are gossip. We should await the presidential statement that is going to be issued after the end of the Jubilee Party meeting today, and that is going to capture our intention. And again, you'll also see the published proposals in the various legal instruments, which shall see which areas that we want to undertake legal reforms. And we are not doing that, by the way, because we want to gain an advantage over NASA. No way. We are doing that pursuant to the observations that were made by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court raised several issues, and the Supreme Court even proceeded to advise Parliament to seal certain loopholes.
Right.
And that is exactly what we intend to do, but not to use those laws to gain advantage of our competitors.
All right. Honorable Kajang, even as Jubilee seal those loopholes, still part of your irreducible minimums when it comes to ICT was the transmission of results with the ICT firm Safran Morpho. A lot of issues have come up with Safran Morpho. As of yesterday, IBC said because of time constraints, we will have to let this company carry on with the transmission of results. But in the dailies this morning, we have a report that IBC did indeed strike a deal with the UNDP to shop for a new supplier of these kits. Again, from a NASA standpoint, does this signal goodwill on the part of this commission to meet some of the irreducible minimums? And, you know, according to NASA and the critics, something is you cannot have your cake and eat it too. So some of your demands have been met. Are you willing to compromise?
As I mentioned, there could be 25% of our demands that could have been addressed. There's still a 75% outstanding. And as I said, we will do an analysis of the criticality of the outstanding 75%. The issue we had with transmission, and remember, before the elections, there is a citizen who went to court. It must have been Apollo Mboya who went to court to compel the IBC to confirm that it had put in place a complementary mechanism. And the court was satisfied that IBC had put in place a complementary mechanism.
Right.
Now, the way the elections were done, when Chris Msando was still alive, he was very passionate in describing the kind of system, the robustness and resilience and system security features that had been in place. For example, on the KIMS device, when transmitting results, you could not transmit the text without the image. After Chris Msando's death, that control suddenly was overridden.
Right.
And we saw a situation where the KIMS devices were able to send text messages, but not the scanned image. What happened? Why did that change? And why? And for those kind of changes to be undertaken, from a systems management perspective, there has to be a change request. Who made that change request? Who approved that change request? Who executed that change request? It was Safran Morpho that executed that change request. So therefore, their hands are not clean. Probably they would say, as a vendor, whatever the user requests, they have an obligation to deliver. We sought evidence of those change requests during the audit. We were not given those documents. Safran Morpho must assure the country that the configuration that was set up, and I've seen Chebukati has addressed it in his letter, that these systems are going to be configured so that if you cannot send the text without the image.
Right.
The question is, why was it not done as initially envisaged? Why must we spend another 10 billion over 40 billion that has already been spent to get these things right?
And maybe just to agree, are you both in agreement, you know, as NASA and Jubilee, that the complementary system was envisaged to be manual?
Yes, and that was the argument. For those of us who opposed it, I personally sat on the floor of Senate. Senate passed the Electoral Laws Amendment Bill at 11:45 p.m. It was going to midnight, because we were on the floor of the House. I remember Mutula Kilonzo Jr. and I and a few other members from the opposition, we were stridently against some of the provisions, not just the issue of complementary mechanisms, but even other issues like delineation of boundaries, where the National Assembly was making unconstitutional proposals that delineation of boundaries will be done by the National Assembly at the exclusion of the Senate, while the Constitution says something different. So the complementary mechanism was supposed to introduce something that was almost manual. So assuming you are in a place like Mfangano Island that I represent, up in the mountain of Sikri, and you do not have 3G network, or you don't have any mobile network.
Right.
The only network you're getting is from Uganda. And you're not able to transmit, to send the text and to send the image.
Right.
There has to be another way for you to get into a speedboat and go to the next Takawiri Island, and if there's network there, you transmit. And if there's no network, then take that boat all the way to the constituency headquarters. I think that is reasonable, and those things have been put in place. But what we saw in the first round was really not invocation of complementary mechanism,
right,
but sabotage of the primary transmission mechanism.
So, Honorable Kangata, still on transmission and identification of voters, you allude to the fact that what's in the dailies this morning is gossip and hearsay with regard to the proposals that are likely to be discussed in this morning morning's Jubilee Parliamentary Group meeting. But among those proposals that is going around, Jubilee is looking to reintroduce the Green Book in the voting process, so that the KM's kits are only used for identification of voters, while the Green Book is used for validation of voters in the process. What informed this decision?
Well, from where I sit, I ought not to comment on that because I'm not aware of that proposal. We should wait and see what the parliamentarians discussed today in the State House.
Right, all right.
Yes.
So,
but you know, there are two things that amaze me. The very radical transformation. The last election, the 2013 election, was digital versus analog. And the president and his deputy branded the opposition as analog.
Right.
This election now has suddenly become about the ballot box versus the server. Those who are called analog then are the ones who are digital today. Those who call themselves digital then are the ones who are analog. They are saying we should go for Green Book, we should go for manual. I mean,
No,
you know,
you see,
it's unfortunate that we change positions
you see the
when
problem,
our interests are at stake.
No, you can't say that because you have to look at the findings of the Supreme Court. The problem with this election is because the findings of the Supreme Court seems to have unraveled the entire infrastructure of our system, where they say if you send us, I don't know what problem, if there's this problem, a very minute problem can cause the entire country to be at a standstill because a whole presidential election has been nullified by the Supreme Court. So how do we mitigate that? You can only mitigate that probably by considering to revert to the old system. Because if the old system were to be in place, I can tell you there's President Uhuru Kenyatta as of today would still be in the State House. But now, where they started questioning, I don't know, this thing was not done, I don't know what, surely it makes sense from where I see it, we consider adopting some of the old analog system. Not because we liked it, by the way, because we have been compelled by the Supreme Court to do so.
Let me come back to you, Honorable Kajwang. You know, my question still stands. Don't you think that NASA should have held off this protest as advised by IBC until after that consultative meeting tomorrow? Because like I mentioned earlier, we have reports that IBC has indeed signed a new deal with UNDP to look for a new supplier for the printing of ballot papers, despite the fact that Dubai-based Al Ghurair has a 2-year contract with the country. So again, doesn't that signal that some of the issues you're likely to protest about today are some of the issues that are likely to be discussed in that meeting with the IBC? And to save the country a lot of headache, you should have gone for that meeting first.
I must say that NASA, we are able to chew gum and walk. We can demonstrate and exercise our constitutional rights according to Article 37 and continue talking. So these things, you know, can be done simultaneously. Our reading of Chebukati's letter on the issue of Al Ghurair, he says that they've got a framework contract that runs for 2 years. And a framework contract is expensive. There has to be, for lack of a better word, something I would call a minimum deposit premium to maintain that framework contract for the 2 years. So even if we were to say that the UNDP is going to come in to help in procurement or to do a different alternative, again, we cannot allow UNDP to unilaterally make decisions. I personally, when this ruling came out and some of my colleagues said the UN should come and conduct the elections, I had a problem because the UN or foreign bodies are not a solution to our problems. We saw the likes of John Kerry come to Kenya with a very patronizing attitude, which, you know, left us wondering whether this was not neo-colonialism playing out. We cannot say that all our solutions lie in the hands of foreigners and foreign bodies. If the UNDP is to make some procurement, and if the IBC has written a letter to Treasury, and Treasury is yet to respond, Treasury is not the only player in this process. In fact, Treasury is not a candidate. The leading candidates, Jubilee and NASA, should know what the context and what the proposals UNDP is putting on the table so that there is no suspicion as to their involvement in the election. So the meeting, if it is convened properly, as I said, if there's a clear agenda, if the IBC will be in control of the processions, if there will be no hecklers that Jubilee will be coming with to that meeting, we could possibly consider coming. And if the Jubilee candidate will be there in person, our candidate will also be there in person.
What is NASA's endgame? Because on the front page of the Star this morning, we have our IBC CEO Ezra Chiloba saying he is too busy planning the rerun and will not resign. What is NASA's game plan, and how long are we likely to see this protest being staged outside the anniversary towers?
I mean, Chiloba reminds me of Kimunya. He reminds me of Isaka-san. And it reminds me of many others who have said over their dead bodies. In fact, it reminds me of Nick Mwendwa, who has said he's not resigning, even after Kenya lost the right to host Chan. I think this sense of entitlement that state and public officers have, they think that their positions and themselves are joined at the hip. It is wrong. Kenya will move on. And I disagree with Irungu Kangata, who says that if Chiloba was not there, there will be crisis. There will be no crisis. A presidential election, as defined by the chair of the commission, is a project. A project is an undertaking with a definite start and a definite end. And it does not have to be run by the CEO. Already a project team has been set up, and the CEO does not need to lead that project team. I am a project manager certified in Prince 2. And I think to that extent, even though some of my colleagues have poked holes at the establishment of a project team, I think it is the right way to go. And that project team does not have to be led by the CEO. So Chiloba, if it's a matter of signing checks, signatories' mandates can be delegated by the commission. Somebody else can do it. But if you are there and you are stinking, and people are saying you are stinking and your stink is going to affect or infect the outcome of this election, what you need to do in the spirit of patriotism and in the spirit of morality, just give way and let the process continue. We do not want to see another situation where after we win on the next election, Irungu Kangata will represent Jubilee in court seeking an overturn of that election.
Honorable Kangata, Jubilee as an equal player to NASA in this election, do you feel that the public confidence in the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission is sufficient to have a free, fair and credible election? And if not, what is Jubilee's proposal of enhancing this public confidence?
Well, the public confidence with the IBC is still high. Of course, at times when people talk of public, they make it appear as if it means the public which support NASA. I think when you talk of public, from where I see it, it comprises both NASA and Jubilee supporters. And based on the results, which were not impugned by the court, clearly majority of the public support the Jubilee coalition. And also in reply to some of his issues that he has raised here, for instance, the issue of demonstration. If you are demonstrating bona fide, there is no way you can demonstrate on Tuesday and tomorrow on Wednesday you are being called into a meeting where you can come and ventilate those issues, unless you're demonstrating where you took demonstration as an end to itself. And for instance, he has said he has an issue with the UN. It is not us who call the UN to come and take a role in our elections. It is Mr. Raila Odinga. He is the one who made that proposal. Personally, I've seen him being interviewed on several international news channels, including BBC, where he has alluded that the new RELAN ought to involve the United Nations. Now, the United Nations make a response. They say they may want to help. Now my colleague here is busy saying, no, we don't need to have UN. That tells you that indeed these people, they don't want an election. The principals say, yes, UN come. Mr. Chebukati says, indeed, the UN wants to participate. My colleague here says, no. Bringing the UN is a form of neocolonialism. So you cannot have your cake and eat it. Take one firm position. And that is the problem that we have with them. They keep on shifting goalposts. They shift goalposts. They say UN, tomorrow they don't want the UN. They are called for talks. They start demonstrating today instead of waiting for the talks to happen tomorrow. What would be the prejudice that would be occasioned on them if we were to go to that meeting? They feel, we are not happy with the results of this meeting, and then they proceed to demonstrate. Why demonstrate today? You'd be given a golden opportunity to come and ventilate your issues. Tomorrow, Wednesday, it's only 12 hours towards Wednesday. You come and ventilate your issues. So I think they have now exposed themselves to what indeed they are. They just want to wreck this country.
All right, go ahead.
I mean, what is wrong with us demonstrating and picketing and petitioning state authorities? What is wrong with it?
Well, the president says it is your constitutional right.
It is our constitutional right. But allow me to be a bit rhetorical. If Uhuru Kenyatta really won on 8th of August, why does he have to change the laws? Why does he have to call a parliamentary group meeting today to change the laws to favor?
Well,
if Uhuru Kenyatta...
It is not us, really, it is the Supreme Court which gave that direction.
If Uhuru Kenyatta really won, and it is the IBC that bungled his victory, why would he be in defense of the same IBC? If Uhuru Kenyatta is truly the president and the head of state, that, as we expect him to be, why would he be threatening other parts of the populace, telling them we shall revisit, telling them we will be out there to meet you, calling others wakora? If he is confident of his mandate, even during this time of temporary incumbency, why does he not focus on building a nation and putting in place the ingredients that can sustain a Kenyan nation, rather than giving rise to brinkmanship that can only lead to civil war? I think what perhaps the viewers sometimes wonder when we talk and bicker as political class, what then is the way forward? We've got an election that has to be held in 29 days.
Right.
Now, when you hear Ruto start saying that NASA have been coming to talk about Nusumkate, what he's doing is reverse psychology. He seems to be preparing the nation for something. He seems to be speaking from the depths of his heart, but making it look like it is NASA that is asking for it. Is an election the solution to the problem that we have? My personal view, and this is not NASA, this is not Raila Odinga, this is Moses Otieno Kajwang speaking, that the election in 29 days will not solve the problems that Kenya faces, because there will be two scenarios. Scenario number one, Uhuru Kenyatta loses. His supporters will feel that their victory earlier on was overturned by the judiciary. They will not rest. It will be strife. Perspective two, Raila Odinga loses. His supporters will think that their victory was snatched away by IBC. Either way, the nation does not win. We must start asking ourselves, is election the only solution to our problems? And just as I said, we can walk and chew gum, we can pursue elections, but we must also find another way of healing this country and uniting it. We must find a way of having national dialogue to address the undercurrents in the country.
As your closing comments, Rungu Kangata, your thoughts on that same question Honorable Kajwang has asked. What is the solution? What is the way forward? Jubilee and NASA aside, we have a nation that needs to be united, cohesive, and integrated.
Moses Kajwang has been talking too much, but his last sentence has let the cat out of the bag. He has exposed the real endgame plan of NASA.
I said that was Moses Kajwang.
Oh, well, maybe. But the point is, NASA appears to be pushing towards what we call a coalition government, so that we have Raila Odinga being included into the government. Of course, that so-called national dialogue is the one which more often than not crystallizes into what we call a coalition government. And to me, that is very undemocratic. We have an election which have been set out by the Constitution and also the Supreme Court. And the whole idea of an election is where the majority wins. You come, you convince the population, he convinces the population. But this idea where you win an election and then some people who lost an election are then formed or given an opportunity to come into the government, that is very undemocratic. If that was to happen, then the question then would arise. My colleague here, Moses, he was not elected unopposed as a senator. Why is it that he's not sharing his position with his competitor? I am a senator of Muranga. I had a competitor. Why is it not? Why is it that I'm not sharing that position with my competitor? If that was to happen for Raila Odinga, why is it that Raila Odinga is so special that he can cause a crisis and then he gets himself into power? If that was to happen, then I would demand each and every politician who is in parliament to share his position with his number 2, number 3. Right. Here, my colleague here, he gets a vehicle, he be driving that vehicle, the car, half of his salary is shared between him and his competitor. Any benefit accruing to him as a senator ought to be shared between him and his competitor. Elections are there to ensure the person who is most popular gets into power. But there's no way we can allow a situation where an unpopular candidate gets into power via what we call a panya route.
All right.
No. You know, Irungu, sorry, just half a second. This definition of a popular candidate, when you have two candidates that have got support that is almost fairly even across the country, 50+1, winner takes it all, is a system that we have. And Irungu is a researcher, he's a PhD student. He's doing research on these things. And he knows that winner takes it all is not a system that is conducive for ethnically diverse and divided societies like ours. Yes, we've got elections in 29 days and 15 hours, but there has to be a dialogue on what is the best form of government or what is the best approach that can unite this country, because definitely in 29 days, we will be more divided than we are today.
I mean, maybe ask the same question that Honorable Kangata and other Jubilee members have been asking. Is NASA's game plan not to have an election?
No, we went to the Supreme Court knowing that the Supreme Court could either uphold the victory of Uhuru Kenyatta or nullify it. And therefore, we're going to fresh elections. We are preparing for fresh elections. That is why we are addressing the IBC on our minimum reforms. And elections must be held in 29 days or before 1st of November. Otherwise, we'll have a crisis. But I gave a prognosis, or I gave a view, a personal view. I am a young Kenyan. I've got a young child. I've got a young family. I would like them to live in this country. I don't want them to live in a country that looks like Ivory Coast, that is partitioned. I don't want them to live in Somalia and therefore end up in Sicily. I don't want them to live in many of the other countries that have suffered strife because of electoral disputes. We are on the precipice. 29 days from today, we probably might not be better off. We might be worse off. Let's do elections, but let's also find a way of talking and dialoguing as a nation.
Let me get your final comments on something else, because you're both attending two rather important events taking place today. I don't know if you will be part of the protest outside the IBC's officers' anniversary towers, but what are you expecting? What should the country expect from these protests today?
Oh, yes, I'll be there. I'm a member of the Firimbi movement, if you recall. But we expect that we are going to conduct ourselves in an orderly manner, peacefully. We shall go there unarmed. This is the way the Constitution prescribes. I just want to ask the police not to be used to throw tear gas at us or to use bees like they used outside the Supreme Court the other day. I think they've evolved their tools of tyranny. Now they're using bees to sting us and to disperse us. We will be peaceful. We will be unarmed. We will be expressing ourselves legitimately as the Constitution expects. We shall demonstrate. If we are called into structured discussions, where the IBC has control of the agenda, has control of the proceedings, and all players are invited, hecklers not invited, we shall be part of it.
All right, Honorable Kangata, you will be attending the Jubilee Parliamentary Group meeting this morning. A lot of things going around in the papers. You say those are just rumors. What should the country be expecting from that? What kind of electoral reforms?
Well, I do not want to speak probably on that issue substantively before we discuss that matter at the State House. But from where I sit, I think we need to do two things. Number one, we clarify what is the so-called complementary system. We clarify that one by a legal provision. Number two, we also need to tell the country the way forward. And the way forward ought to be clarified in law, because I would imagine we need to tell the country there's no way we are going to have IBC changes within the time that has been left between now and the rerun. There is no way, for instance, you can have Chiloba exiting IBC and we are able to conduct elections under IBC's supervision. And as to the demonstration, my colleagues, they are going to conduct, yes, it is good, they have the right to do so, but on the other hand also, we Jubilee people, we have the right also to do what we call counter demonstrations. If we were to do counter demonstrations, they are going to be peaceful. We shall not fight with anyone, and we would also urge police also to provide an accordance.
Enough security.
Can you confirm there'll be no bees? There'll be no bees.
Well, as to the bees, it is, well, I'm told the bees were sent there by NASA because they were attacking people with the red, and you know red is our color. So I don't know, maybe, and again, their principal is the one who is always invoking things which are probably they belong to the black magic area of Tialala, Kinatidim, surely.
Let's leave that for now.
It is not us.
Hopefully there will be no busy
Yes,
none of this protest.
they
Thank you so
use
much for speaking to us. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen, this morning. Honorable Irungu Kangata is the senator for Murang'a County, as well as Honorable Moses Kajwang, Honorable Homa Bay Senator, rather, joining us on our political point discussion this morning. Thank you so much for interacting with us on our phone calls as well as on social media. Many of your comments coming through. Remember, we were asking you whether the targeted IBC officials should bow to NASA pressure and resign. Let me just take a bit, 2 or 3 of your comments here. Francis says, once your mind is set on one thing, you can't even take time to understand. He says, whatever happened in IBC is on every Kenyan's mind. It wasn't right. Let Kenyans learn to do the right thing as a nation. And Suleiman Nasir here says, let it come to your attention that Chiloba used to work for UNDP. So pointing out to the Al Ghurair issue there. And Innocent Musumbi says there is no doubt for Kenya to have a credible election, the indicted IEBC culprits must step aside. Why is Jubilee protecting thugs? And John Harrison says those tainted officials need to leave office. Once a thief, always a thief. We'll be sampling more of them when we come back from this short break. Many thanks for being part of the Political Point. Take a short commercial break here on Morning Express. More news coming up after the break.